The gunshot wound had barely healed when Duncan Everett decided he would never trust another living soul again. And for 3 years he kept that promise until the autumn morning in 1878, when he found a woman collapsed near his fence line, burning with fever and delirious from infection. Duncan had been checking his property boundaries that October dawn, the Colorado mountains already dusted with early snow, when he spotted the crumpled figure in a faded blue dress. His first instinct was to ride past, to pretend he had seen nothing, because getting involved meant opening doors he had nailed shut. But his horse whinnied and stamped, and something in him could not leave another human being to die in the wilderness, no matter how much he wanted to protect the fortress he had built around his heart. He dismounted slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward the revolver at his hip before he caught himself. The woman was unconscious, her breathing shallow and rapid. Her dark blonde hair was matted with sweat and dirt, and when he touched her forehead, the heat radiating from her skin made him curse under his breath. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with a face that might have been pretty if it was not contorted in pain. A deep gash on her arm had turned an angry red, the flesh swollen and hot with infection. Duncan looked toward Georgetown, visible in the valley below with its mining operations and bustling streets. He could take her to the doctor there, leave her with someone who could handle this responsibility. But the ride would take over an hour, and she might not survive it. He looked back at his ranch house, sitting alone on the hillside, and felt the old resistance rising in him like bile. 3 years ago, he would have carried a stranger into his home without hesitation. 3 years ago, before Margaret Chen had smiled at him with those lying eyes and stolen everything he had worked for, before she had sold his cattle contracts to his competitor, and disappeared with the money, and the man he had called his best friend. 3 years ago, before he learned that opening your heart meant giving someone the knife to gut you with. The woman moaned, a sound of such pure agony that it cut through his bitter memories. Duncan made his decision with a growl of frustration, scooping her into his arms with more care than he wanted to feel. She was lighter than he expected, her body fragile in his grip. He settled her across his saddle and mounted behind her, holding her steady as he urged his horse toward home. The ride took 20 minutes that felt like hours. She drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering words he could not understand. Once she opened her eyes, pale green and clouded with fever, and looked at him with such fear that he found himself speaking gently despite himself. "You are safe," he said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue after years of speaking to no one but his horses. "I am taking you somewhere warm." She did not seem to hear him, her eyes rolling back as she slipped under again. Duncan tightened his grip and rode faster. His ranch house was small but well built, a testament to the work he had put into starting over after losing everything. He had chosen this isolated spot deliberately, far enough from Georgetown that visitors were rare and neighbors non-existent. The barn held 4 horses, his only companions these past years, and the house held everything he needed to live alone. Duncan carried the woman inside and laid her on his bed, the only bed in the single-bedroom house. He had not shared this space with anyone since he built it, and seeing another person in it felt like a violation of the sanctuary he had created. But there was no other option. He stoked the fire in the hearth until the room warmed, then set about gathering what he needed. Water from the well, clean cloths, the whiskey he kept for cold nights, a sharp knife he held in the fire until it glowed. He had tended enough injuries over his years as a ranch hand and then a ranch owner to know what needed to be done. The infection had to be cleaned out, the wound properly dressed, and then it was up to her body to fight. He cut away the sleeve of her dress, exposing the full extent of the injury. It looked like a knife wound, the edges ragged and dirty. Someone had attacked her, or she had defended herself. Either way, she had been out there long enough for the infection to take deep root. Duncan gritted his teeth and began. She screamed when he cleaned the wound, thrashing weakly against his hold. He had to pin her shoulder with one hand while working with the other, pouring whiskey into the cut and digging out the infected tissue with the tip of his knife. It was brutal work, necessary work, and he hated every second of it. Hated that he cared enough to do it. Hated that her screams made his chest tight with something that felt too much like compassion. When it was done, he bandaged the wound with clean strips torn from one of his spare shirts and covered her with every blanket he owned. She shivered despite the fire, despite the fever, her body racked with chills that made the bed frame shake. Duncan sat back in his chair and watched her, his jaw clenched tight. This was temporary, he told himself. Once the fever broke, once she was strong enough, he would take her to Georgetown and be done with it. She would go back to wherever she came from, and he would return to his solitude. This changed nothing. The first night was the worst. Her fever spiked near midnight, and Duncan found himself sponging her face with cool water, trying to bring the temperature down. She spoke in her delirium, fragments of sentences that painted a picture he did not want to see. "Please, I did not steal it," she whispered, her voice raw. "He is lying. I would never. Father, please believe me." Later, she called out for someone named William, begging him not to leave her, her hands clutched at the blankets as if holding on to something precious. Duncan listened and felt the old wounds in his chest ache in recognition. Betrayal had a sound, and it was the same in every voice. By dawn, she had quieted into an exhausted sleep, and Duncan allowed himself to doze in the chair, his body stiff and protesting. He woke when the sun was high to find her eyes open and clear for the first time, watching him with a mixture of confusion and fear. "Where am I?" Her voice was barely a whisper, her throat dry and cracked. Duncan stood and poured water from the pitcher into a cup. He approached slowly, aware of how he must look to her, a tall, broad-shouldered stranger with 3 days of beard growth and eyes that had forgotten how to be soft. "My ranch. I found you on my property yesterday morning. You were sick with fever." She struggled to sit up, and he moved to help her despite himself, propping pillows behind her back. She flinched from his touch, but had no strength to resist. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the sparse furnishings, the rifle mounted above the door, the single window with its view of mountains and sky. "I do not remember," she said finally. "I was traveling to Georgetown. There was a man on the road who offered to guide me through the pass. He seemed kind." Her voice broke. "He tried to rob me. When I fought back, he cut me and took my horse, my bags, everything. I walked for a long time before I could not walk anymore." Duncan handed her the water and watched her drink it in small, careful sips. "The wound was infected. I cleaned it out. You will have a scar, but if you keep it clean, you should heal. Thank you." She looked at him directly then, and he saw intelligence in those green eyes along with a wariness that matched his own. "I am Willa Anderson. I came from St. Louis to work as a teacher. Georgetown advertised for someone educated and I needed a fresh start." She paused. "I suppose I do not have that position anymore. I was expected 3 days ago. You were half dead. I doubt they will hold that against you." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You do not know small towns. Unreliable is unreliable, regardless of the reason." Duncan found himself almost smiling back before he caught himself and turned away. "Rest. We will worry about Georgetown when you are stronger." Over the following days, an uneasy routine developed. Duncan slept on the floor near the fire, his body protesting the hard wood, but his sense of propriety not allowing him to put an injured woman anywhere but the bed. He cooked simple meals of beans and salt pork, and Willa ate what she could keep down. Her fever returned in waves, each time a little less severe, and he tended to her with grim efficiency, changing bandages and making her drink water when she wanted only to sleep. She did not talk much at first, exhausted by the effort of healing. But as the days passed and strength slowly returned to her limbs, she began to observe him with open curiosity. Duncan felt the weight of her attention like a physical thing, uncomfortable and too intimate. He was not used to being seen anymore. "You live here alone," she said on the 5th day. It was not a question. "Yes." He did not elaborate, focusing on stirring the pot of stew he was attempting. Cooking for two was harder than cooking for one, and he kept making too much or too little. By choice or circumstance. Does it matter? I suppose not. She was quiet for a moment. "You are not what I expected from a Colorado rancher." That made him turn. "What did you expect? Someone rougher, I suppose. Cruder. You speak well. You have books." She nodded toward the small shelf near the window where he kept his few precious volumes. "You play chess." She indicated the board set up on the table, the pieces arranged in the middle of a game he had been playing against himself. Duncan felt exposed, as if she had glimpsed something he kept hidden. "I was not always alone. What changed?" The question was simple, but it opened doors he had locked tight. He could deflect, change the subject, retreat into silence. That was what he had done for 3 years, and it had served him well. But something in her face, in the genuine interest without judgment, made him hesitate. "I trusted the wrong people," he said finally. "They took advantage. I learned my lesson." Willa nodded slowly. "St. Louis taught me similar lessons. My father was a judge, well respected and stern. When his clerk accused me of stealing from the courthouse funds, my father believed him over me. The clerk was a man, educated and smooth-talking. I was just his daughter, easily influenced in his eyes." Her voice was steady, but Duncan heard the pain beneath it. "The truth came out eventually. The clerk was arrested and my father apologized. But by then, I knew I could not stay in a house where I was so easily doubted." They looked at each other across the small room, two people who had learned the same hard truth in different ways. Duncan felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight knot he had carried for so long. He did not want to feel it, did not want this connection, but it was there regardless. "Why teaching?" he asked, desperate to move the conversation away from the dangerous territory of shared understanding. "I love learning, and I love helping others discover that same joy. In St. Louis, I volunteered at a school for children whose families could not afford tutors. Those were the best hours of my week." Her expression softened. "I thought in a new place, with a new position, I could build something that mattered, something that was entirely mine." Duncan understood that desire more than he wanted to admit. This ranch, small and isolated as it was entirely his. No one could take it from him because he had taken no partners, accepted no help, owed no debts. It was freedom through solitude. But as he watched Willa push herself to sit more upright, wincing at the pull of her healing wound, he wondered what freedom really cost. By the end of the first week, Willa was strong enough to walk from the bed to the table, though the effort left her breathing hard. Duncan watched her with grudging admiration. She did not complain, did not ask for more than he offered, and did not expect him to entertain her. She seemed content to read his books, watch the mountains through the window, and slowly rebuild her strength. But her presence had changed his home in ways he could not ignore. The smell of her soap, something floral she had made from herbs she found in his kitchen. The sound of her humming as she worked on mending her dress, which he had washed and hung to dry. The chess pieces moved on the board each morning, as she played the opposing side of his eternal game against himself, turning it into a real match. "You are good at this," he said one evening, studying the board. She had put him in a difficult position, and he could not see an easy way out. "My father taught me. It was one of the few things we did together that did not end in disappointment." She moved her knight, a clever play that opened up multiple threats. "He said chess teaches you to think 3 moves ahead, to anticipate how your opponent will respond to your actions." Duncan moved his bishop, buying himself time. Sounds like a useful skill for life, not just games. Perhaps, though in life people are less predictable than chess pieces, sometimes they do things that make no logical sense. He thought about Margaret, about the night he came home to find her gone and his accounts emptied. It had made no sense. They had talked about marriage, about building something together. He had trusted her completely. "People surprise you," he said quietly, "usually in the worst ways." "Not always." Willa looked at him over the board. "You surprised me. You could have left me to die. It would have been easier, safer. No risk of involving yourself in a stranger's troubles. But you brought me here, tended my wound, shared your home and food. That is a good surprise." Duncan felt heat rise in his face, unaccustomed to praise. Any decent person would have done the same. No, they would not. Decent people watched me walk through St. Louis after the accusations, and not one offered help. Decent people crossed the street to avoid me, whispered behind my back, assumed the worst because it was easier than questioning authority. Her voice was firm. "You are not just decent, Duncan Everett. You are kind, even when you do not want to be." He had no response to that, so he focused on the game, moving pieces with more care than he usually bothered with. But her words stayed with him, working under his skin like a splinter. That night, Duncan lay on his bedroll near the fire and listened to Willa breathe in the darkness. Sleep eluded him. His mind kept circling back to the past week, to how easily she had slipped into his carefully ordered life. It should have bothered him more. It should have felt like an invasion. Instead, it felt like something he could not quite name, something that scared him more than another betrayal ever could. The second week brought the first real snow of the season. Duncan woke to find the world transformed, white and clean and deadly for anyone caught unprepared. He checked his stores and calculated carefully. He had enough food for one person to last comfortably through winter. For 2 people, it would be tight but manageable if they were careful. Willa was well enough now to help with small tasks. She insisted on it, despite his protests, saying she could not lie abed any longer without losing her mind. So he let her help with cooking, with mending, with the small domestic tasks that kept a household running. She moved carefully, favoring her injured arm, but color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes were bright with regained health. "We should talk about Georgetown," she said one afternoon as they prepared dinner together. "The snow will make travel difficult, but I cannot impose on your hospitality forever." Duncan sliced potatoes with more force than necessary. "The pass is dangerous now. We would need to wait for a clear day, and those are rare once winter sets in properly. So I am trapped here." "You say that like it is a prison." "Is it not?" She turned to face him. "You made it clear from the beginning that you value your solitude. Every day I remain is an intrusion." He wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in his throat because she was right, or she had been right in the beginning. Now he was not sure what he felt. "You are not an intrusion," he said finally. "You are an unexpected complication. How diplomatic." But she smiled a little, and he found himself smiling back despite his best efforts. "When the weather clears, I will take you to Georgetown myself. Make sure you arrive safely this time. And the teaching position, we will explain what happened. If they are reasonable people, they will understand. And if they are not," Duncan met her eyes, Then we will figure something else out." That night, the storm intensified, wind howling around the house and snow piling against the door. They sat by the fire, Duncan working on repairing a bridle while Willa read aloud from one of his books, a collection of poetry he had bought on impulse years ago and rarely opened. Her voice was soothing, rising and falling with the rhythm of the verses, and Duncan found himself listening more to the sound than the words. "Do you miss it?" she asked suddenly, setting the book aside. "Miss what?" "Being close to someone. Having a companion, a partner. Or have you grown so accustomed to solitude that you prefer it?" The question was too personal, too direct, and his first instinct was to shut it down. But the firelight painted her face in warm tones, and the storm made the house feel like its own small world, separate from everything else. "I miss the idea of it," he admitted. "The reality was disappointing." "One disappointment," Willa said. "One person who proved unworthy of your trust. Does that mean everyone would do the same? The risk is too high. Losing everything once was enough. So you have given up. Decided that safety is more valuable than connection." Her words stung because they were true. "What would you have me do? Open myself up again, hope for better, and wait to be destroyed a second time? I would have you live." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "Truly live, not just exist in this beautiful, lonely place. What Margaret did to you was terrible. What my father did to me was terrible. But if we let those experiences define us forever, if we let them turn us into shadows of ourselves, then they win. They get to control our entire lives, not just those moments of betrayal." You say that like it is simple. It is not simple. It is the hardest thing in the world, but Duncan, you have spent 3 years building walls. Maybe it is time to consider building bridges instead. He wanted to argue, to defend his choices, to explain that walls kept you safe and bridges only led to more pain. But sitting there in the firelight with Willa Anderson, who had been betrayed and hurt and still believed in connection, still believed in trying, he felt those walls begin to crack. The weeks blended together as winter deepened its grip on the Colorado mountains. The snow fell steadily, sometimes soft and gentle, sometimes fierce and blinding. Duncan knew these storms well enough to recognize that they were truly snowed in now, with no safe passage to Georgetown until spring. He told Willa as much, watching her face for disappointment or frustration. Instead, she looked almost relieved. "Then I will earn my keep. Teach me about ranching. Put me to work." So he did. They fell into a rhythm that felt startlingly natural. Duncan taught her how to care for the horses, how to recognize signs of illness or injury in the animals, how to muck stalls and distribute feed. She learned quickly, her mind sharp and her hands increasingly steady as her arm finished healing. The scar was prominent, a raised red line that would fade to white over time, but she did not try to hide it. "Proof that I survived," she said when she caught him looking at it. "We all carry scars. Some are just more visible than others." They talked while they worked, conversations that ranged from trivial to profound. Willa told him about St. Louis, about the city's energy and culture, and the way the Mississippi River looked at sunset. She spoke about her mother, who had died when Willa was 12, and how that loss had created a distance between her and her father that they never quite bridged. Duncan found himself talking more than he had in years. He told her about growing up on a farm in Kansas, about how he had come to Colorado seeking fortune in the mines before realizing his skills lay with animals and land, rather than pickaxes and darkness. He even told her about Margaret, about the small ranch he had built with a partner named Thomas Reed, about coming home one October day to find everything gone. "She left a note," he said, surprising himself with the detail. "They were in the barn, standing close for warmth as wind rattled the walls. It said she was sorry, but Thomas offered her more than I ever could: money, security, excitement. She said I was too content with small successes, that I lacked ambition. He laughed bitterly. The funny thing is, she was probably right. I never wanted an empire, I just wanted a home. That is not a lack of ambition, Willa said firmly. That is knowing yourself. Too many people chase things they do not actually want because society tells them those things matter. A home, a real home built with care and maintained with love, that is worth more than any empire. Is that what you were looking for in Georgetown, a home? Yes. A place where I could belong, where my work would matter. I thought teaching would give me that. She paused. But I am beginning to think home is not always a place. Sometimes it is a feeling. Their eyes met, and Duncan felt the air between them charge with something unspoken. He wanted to close the distance, to reach for her, to take the risk she kept urging him toward. But fear held him back, the old fear of trusting and losing, of opening and being destroyed. Willa seemed to sense his internal struggle. She smiled softly and returned to brushing the horse beside her, giving him space to breathe. Christmas came, marked only by the date on Duncan's calendar. He had not celebrated in years, seeing no point when alone. But Willa insisted they do something to acknowledge the day. She made a special dinner from their dwindling supplies, roasting a chicken he had been saving and making biscuits that were nearly as good as his mother used to bake. She even fashioned decorations from pine branches and berries, giving the Stark house a festive air that felt foreign and wonderful at once. "I have something for you," she said after dinner, producing a small wrapped package. Duncan stared at it. "I did not get you anything. You saved my life and gave me shelter all winter. I think that counts." She pressed the package into his hands. "Open it." Inside was a carefully carved chess piece, a king, made from a bit of wood she must have worked on in secret. It was beautiful, detailed and smooth, clearly the work of many hours. "The king on your set was cracked," she explained. "I noticed you avoided using it. This is not as fine as the original, but it is whole." Duncan turned the piece over in his hands, overwhelmed by the simple kindness of it. "Willa, this is—" He could not finish, emotion clogging his throat. "It is just a chess piece," she said gently. "But I wanted you to know that I see you. I see the care you put into everything, the way you maintain this place with such precision. I see how hard you work to protect yourself. And I want you to know that I would never take advantage of that. You are safe with me." The words broke something inside him. Duncan set the chess piece down carefully and reached for her hand, holding it gently in his larger, calloused one. "I am beginning to realize that," he said quietly. "It terrifies me, but I realize it." Willa squeezed his hand. "Being scared is not a bad thing. It means you are trying something that matters." They sat together by the fire, hands linked, watching the flames dance. Duncan felt the walls he had built so carefully continuing to crumble. And for the first time in 3 years, he did not try to repair them. January brought brutally cold temperatures but clearer skies. Duncan and Willa developed a routine that went beyond mere survival. They worked together seamlessly now, anticipating each other's needs and movements. When a pipe froze, they fixed it together. When supplies ran low, they inventoried together, making plans and adjustments. When the isolation felt too heavy, they played chess or cards, read aloud, or simply talked until the cabin filled with conversation. One particularly cold night, Willa convinced Duncan to teach her to dance. "I never learned properly," she admitted. "My father thought it frivolous. But I always wanted to know." "There is no music," Duncan pointed out, even as he stood and offered his hand. "Then we will make our own." So they danced in the small space between the table and the fire, Willa humming a waltz while Duncan guided her through the steps. He was rusty, not having danced since before Margaret, but muscle memory returned. Willa was a quick learner, following his lead with only occasional missteps that made them both laugh. "See, this is not so difficult," she said, smiling up at him. "You are a fine dancer when you let yourself be. I am surprised I remember how. The body remembers joy, even when we try to forget it." They swayed together, and Duncan became acutely aware of every point of contact between them. Her hand in his other hand at her waist, the small distance that still separated them. It would be so easy to close that gap, to kiss her the way he had been wanting to for weeks now. But the fear still held him, whispering warnings about trust and betrayal and loss. As if reading his mind, Willa stopped moving. She looked up at him with those clear green eyes, and he saw understanding there, mixed with something that looked like hope. "Duncan," she said softly, "I know you are afraid. I am afraid too. What if I let myself care for you and then the spring comes and you decide I should leave? What if I trust you with my heart and you keep me at arm's length forever? These are real fears." She took a breath. "But I would rather risk that pain than spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been. Willa, you do not have to say anything now. I just needed you to know that I am here, that I want to be here, and that whatever you decide, I will respect it. But Duncan, please do not let fear make your decisions for you. You deserve more than that." She pulled away gently and went to the bed, settling in for the night. Duncan stood frozen by the fire, his mind racing. Every logical part of him screamed to maintain distance, to protect himself, to remember the lessons he had learned so painfully. But beneath the logic, beneath the fear, something else stirred. A longing that had nothing to do with reason and everything to do with the way Willa made him feel seen, understood, valued. He did not sleep that night, lying on his bedroll and staring at the ceiling. But by dawn, he had made his decision. The morning broke clear and cold, sunlight streaming through the window to paint everything gold. Duncan rose, stoked the fire, and made coffee. When Willa woke, he brought her a cup, sitting on the edge of the bed in a gesture that was more intimate than anything they had shared before. "I have been thinking about what you said," he began, watching steam rise from his cup. "About fear making my decisions. You are right. I have let what happened with Margaret control me for 3 years. I built this place to be a fortress, somewhere no one could reach me, and it worked. I was safe." He looked at her. "I was also miserable." Willa set her cup down, giving him her full attention. "You asked me if I miss being close to someone. The truth is, I did not realize how much I missed it until you arrived. These past months, having you here, talking with you, working beside you, it reminded me of what I gave up when I chose isolation. And yes, it terrifies me. The thought of trusting again, of caring for someone who might leave or betray me, it makes me want to retreat." He reached out, taking her hand. "But the thought of letting you walk away in spring without telling you how I feel, that terrifies me more. Duncan, I am in love with you, Willa. I think I have been for weeks now, but I was too stubborn and scared to admit it. You crashed into my life when I was not looking for anyone, and you changed everything. You made me want to try again, to believe that not everyone will hurt me, that some risks are worth taking." Tears welled in Willa's eyes. "I love you too. I think I started falling that first moment I saw you clearly, when the fever broke, and I realized this gruff, careful man had saved my life for no reason except basic human decency. And then I kept falling, watching you care for the horses, play chess, work with such dedication on every small task. You are everything I did not know I was looking for." Duncan leaned forward, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she met him halfway, her lips soft and warm against his. The kiss was gentle, exploratory, full of promise and hope, and the tentative joy of two people who had learned to guard their hearts finally choosing to open them. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "So what now?" Willa asked. "Now we stop pretending this is temporary. Now we stop acting like you are a guest who will leave when the snow melts. If you want to stay, if you want to build a life here with me, then this becomes our home. Not mine. Ours." "What about Georgetown? The teaching position," Duncan considered. "We could go together when spring comes. See if they still need a teacher. If they do, you could take the position. We are not so far that you could not ride there during the week. Or you could teach here, start a small school for children in the surrounding ranches. There are families scattered through these mountains, and I know several have children who need education." He squeezed her hand. "Or you could do something else entirely. The point is, we figure it out together." Willa's smile was radiant. "Together. I like the sound of that." They spent the rest of the winter planning their future. Duncan told Willa everything about his ranch, about his plans to expand slowly, to breed better horses, to maybe take on a few cattle come spring. Willa talked about education, about how she could develop a curriculum that worked for children of different ages all learning in one room, about books they would need to order from Denver or even St. Louis. But they also simply enjoyed being together, no longer fighting the connection between them. They moved the chessboard to a place of honor on the mantel, using Willa's carved king. They danced often, Willa humming different tunes she remembered from her youth. They kissed by the fire, slow and sweet, learning each other with the care of people who knew how precious this was. One night in late February, as they lay in bed together, Duncan traced the scar on Willa's arm. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Coming to Colorado, going through everything you went through," Willa thought for a moment. "I regret the pain. I regret that there are people cruel enough to hurt others for no good reason. But I do not regret the journey that brought me to you. If I had arrived in Georgetown safely, if everything had gone according to plan, I would be boarding with some family in town, teaching during the day and lonely at night. I would never have met you." She turned to face him. "Every hard step I took led me here, so no, I do not regret it." Duncan kissed her forehead. "I spent 3 years regretting everything. Regretting trusting Margaret, regretting my partnership with Thomas, regretting not seeing the signs. But you are teaching me that regret is a prison. Better to learn and move forward than to stay trapped in what was." "We are both learning," Willa said. "That is what love is, I think, choosing to grow together instead of staying stagnant apart." March brought the first real thaw. Snow melted from the roof, creating a constant drip that signaled winter's end. The pass would be clear soon, making travel to Georgetown possible. Duncan and Willa prepared for the journey, both nervous and excited about what they would find. They rode together on a bright April morning, the world green and new around them. Georgetown sprawled in the valley, larger than Duncan remembered. The town had grown with the mining operations, buildings climbing the hillsides and streets bustling with people and wagons. Their first stop was the schoolhouse, a neat building near the church. The current teacher, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Patterson, greeted them with surprise. "You must be Miss Anderson. We heard you never arrived, assumed you had changed your mind or met with misfortune." "The latter," Willa said, then explained briefly about the robbery and her injury. She introduced Duncan as her fiancé, the word sending a thrill through him even though they had agreed on this story for propriety's sake. Though in truth, Duncan intended to make it real as soon as possible. Mrs. Patterson listened with growing sympathy. "How terrible! But you are recovered now." "The town still needs teachers. I am managing 3 grades alone and it is too much. If you are still interested, the position is yours." Willa glanced at Duncan, who nodded his support. I am interested, but my situation has changed. I am living at Mr. Everett's ranch in the mountains. I could teach during the week and return home for weekends, or we could discuss establishing a school closer to the mountain ranches. The latter is interesting, Mrs. Patterson said thoughtfully. Several families have mentioned the difficulty of sending their children so far. If you could establish something closer, the school board might even provide some funding. They left with promises to discuss details once Willa and Duncan were properly married. That evening they checked into the hotel, taking separate rooms for propriety, but meeting in the lobby afterward to walk the town streets. "What do you think?" Duncan asked as they watched the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold. "I think we can make this work. A small school near your ranch, serving the families scattered through the hills. I could teach in the mornings, help with the ranch in the afternoons. We could build something meaningful together." Duncan stopped walking and turned to face her. Right there on the main street of Georgetown, with people passing on all sides, he took both her hands. "Willa Anderson, I told Mrs. Patterson you were my fiancé. I want to make that true. Will you marry me?" Willa laughed, joy shining in her face. "We already live together. We have been sharing a bed for weeks. I love you desperately. So yes, Duncan Everett, I will marry you." They were married the next day by Georgetown's judge, a crusty old man who made no comment on their haste. Duncan bought Willa a simple gold band from the general store, slipping it onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. She kissed him there in front of the judge and the witnesses, and Duncan felt the last of his walls finally collapse completely. The ride back to their ranch now, felt different. Everything looked the same, but Duncan saw it through new eyes. This was no longer a fortress of isolation. It was a home he would share with someone he loved, someone who loved him in return. That summer, they worked harder than Duncan had ever worked alone. They expanded the barn to house more horses. They built a small, separate building that would serve as Willa's school, with benches and a desk and a slate board Duncan ordered from Denver. Word spread through the mountain families, and by September, 6 children attended regularly, ranging in age from 7 to 14. Willa taught them reading, arithmetic, history, and science, her face glowing with the satisfaction of work she loved. Duncan focused on the horses, building a reputation for quality breeding stock. His herd grew slowly but steadily, and he began to make real money for the first time since starting over. But more than the financial success, he valued the partnership with Willa. They made decisions together, planned together, celebrated victories and weathered setbacks as a team. The first winter of their marriage was harsh, but they barely noticed, too wrapped up in each other and the life they were building. They celebrated Christmas with decorations and special food, starting traditions they would maintain for years. They played chess by the fire, though now the games often ended with kisses instead of moves. They danced in the small cabin, Willa humming and Duncan holding her close, grateful beyond words for the stranger who had collapsed on his property and changed everything. In May of their second year together, Willa announced she was pregnant. Duncan was terrified and thrilled in equal measure, worried about the dangers of childbirth in such an isolated place, but unable to contain his joy at the idea of a child, a family, a future that extended beyond just the two of them. Their son was born in January 1880, during a snowstorm that trapped them completely. Duncan delivered the baby himself, with Willa guiding him through what needed to be done. It was the most terrifying experience of his life, but when he held his son for the first time, saw Willa's exhausted, radiant smile, he felt complete in a way he never had before. They named him James after Duncan's father. He was healthy and loud, filling the cabin with noise and life and constant motion once he started crawling. Willa returned to teaching after a few months, bringing James with her to the schoolhouse. The children adored him, taking turns helping care for him during lessons. 2 years later, their daughter arrived, born in the summer heat with less drama than her brother. They named her Clara, after Willa's mother. She was quiet where James was loud, thoughtful where he was impulsive, and Duncan loved both his children with a fierce protectiveness that sometimes surprised him. As the years passed, Duncan often thought back to that October morning in 1878 when he found Willa collapsed near his fence. If he had ridden past, if he had left her to die, his life would be so different. He would still be alone in his fortress, safe and miserable, letting fear control him. Instead, he had taken the risk. He had opened his door and eventually his heart, and everything had changed. Not easily, not without struggle, but completely and beautifully. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Duncan and Willa stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching James and Clara play in the yard. The ranch had grown substantially, now employing 2 hands to help with the increased herd. Willa's school had 12 students, and she had become a respected figure in the small community that had formed in the mountains. "You ever regret it?" Duncan asked, echoing the question from years before. "Staying here instead of living in town, having the life you originally planned?" Willa leaned into him, his arm coming around her naturally. "Not for a moment. This life, this family, this love we built together, it is better than anything I could have planned. Sometimes the best things come from the detours, not the original path." Duncan kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I spent 3 years thinking I was protecting myself by staying alone. You taught me that real protection comes from having people who love you, who stand with you, who make life worth living." "We taught each other," Willa corrected. "You taught me to trust again after my father's betrayal. You showed me that dependability and steadiness are not boring but precious. You gave me a home not just in this place but in your heart." They watched their children for a while in comfortable silence. James was teaching Clara to ride, patient and careful with his younger sister. They had Duncan's determination and Willa's intelligence, and they were growing up surrounded by love and security. "I want to expand the school," Willa said eventually. "Maybe hire an assistant teacher, serve more families, and I have been thinking about starting a library, something for the whole community." "Then we will make it happen," Duncan said. "Whatever you need." "I need you," Willa said simply. "Everything else is just details." Duncan turned her to face him, looking into the green eyes that had first opened in his cabin over a decade ago, clouded with fever and fear. Now they were clear and bright, full of love and contentment and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. "You have me," he said. "For as long as we both shall live, you have me." They kissed there on the porch as their children played and the mountains stood eternal and unchanging around them. Duncan Everett, who had sworn never to let anyone close again, who had built walls to keep the world out, had found that the right person could not just break those walls but make you grateful they did. Willa Anderson, who had traveled to Colorado seeking a fresh start and found betrayal instead, had discovered that sometimes you have to lose your way completely to find where you truly belong. Together, they had built something neither could have created alone. A home, a family, a love story that started with illness and isolation and bloomed into a life filled with purpose and joy. The cowboy who had closed himself off and the stranger who fell sick on his property had become partners, lovers, parents, and proof that taking risks on people, on love, on connection, was always worth it. As the sun set over their ranch, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, Duncan held his wife close and felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude that he had made the choice to help a stranger that long ago October morning. Gratitude that fear had not won. Gratitude that love, stubborn and persistent and surprising, had found a way through all his defenses. The ranch would continue to grow. Their children would grow up and eventually have children of their own. Willa's school would serve generations of mountain families, teaching them to read and think and dream. But none of it would have happened if two wounded people had not taken the enormous risk of trying again, of believing that not everyone would betray them, of opening their hearts one more time. Years later, when Duncan was old and gray, sitting on that same porch with Willa beside him, their grandchildren playing in the yard where their children once played, someone asked him the secret to a happy life. He thought for a long moment, looking at the woman who had changed everything, and gave the only answer that made sense. "Take the risk," he said. "When something scares you because it matters, when someone makes you want to try again despite every reason not to, take the risk." The walls we build to protect ourselves end up being prisons. Real safety, real joy, comes from having the courage to let people in. Willa squeezed his hand, smiling with the same radiance she had shown on their wedding day, and Duncan knew he had given the right answer. Their love story had started with fear and betrayal and isolation, but it had become something beautiful because they chose, every single day, to keep choosing each other. And that, Duncan thought, was what made a life worth living.